Hi, and welcome to the Thank God for the Beatles podcast. If this is your first time, welcome, and if you are returning, it's great to have you back. I'm Karen, and joining me as co-host is my brother Jeff.
That's me.
We love the Beatles, and we're always talking about them, always something interesting to discover, to recall, or to remember. And on today's episode, we are remembering the Paul is dead hoax/conspiracy theory that was, at the time, it was a very huge story. And 52 years later, people are still researching, they're looking for clues, they're doubting. And, you know, if you go on any Beatles website and someone refers to it, you know, there's a whole litany of the Paul is dead comments where people are like, it's Paul, you know, it's fake Paul, even on YouTube. And it's just fascinating because we were young during this and we really were a part of it as well and of discovering it. So it's left an indelible impression on us, and it's indicative of the power of conspiracy theories and rumors and how they get a life of their own. And it's, you know, it's considered one of the top 5 hoaxes: the JFK assassination, the moon landing, Roswell, 9/11, and just first impressions of just since you were older than I was at the time.
Well, of course I'm older than, but I'd say that first of all, the JFK assassination
You're still older than me.
I don't think that was a hoax. And Roswell, well, that very well could be true, but all the other ones, the moon landing, I think that was real. Okay, I think 9/11 was real and not a conspiracy. And I have worn out the grooves on both sides of my records, reading these articles from these magazines and thinking and wondering, did this really happen? Is William Campbell really the substitute for Paul McCartney? And I went peering through the album covers for the supposed clues for everything, and then going back and listening to all the lyrics and going, And I actually, at that time, being 10, 11, and 12, and 13, I was pondering this and actually taking seriously the possibility that, well, maybe it's possible. It's plausible. So because it was in the range of plausible and I was far more impressionable, I actually thought, well, maybe this guy is a Paul McCartney imitator. Is it likely? No. Was it possible? Well, of course, anything is possible. But I had basically taken the record grooves and worn them out. I would put on Revolution 9 from the so-called White Album, which is called the Beatles. And I would hear, turn me on, dead man, turn me on, dead man. And I'd listen to the accident and go, what? And thinking, you know, the noise, it's sent to see a dentist to find a pair of teeth. You know, and then I'd play it backwards. I'd go to the end of I'm So Tired, where it sounds like he's mumbling. If you play it forward and you play it backward, it sounds like he goes, miss him, Paul is dead. And you think, oh, he's saying miss him, Paul is dead. A lot of things backwards sound like there's something. It's just like at the end of Strawberry Fields, where he goes, you know, he said cranberry sauce, but it sounds like I buried Paul. And that became an ongoing joke. I buried Paul. You know, the first people sounded like that. It could have possibly sounded like I buried Paul. Oh, my goodness.
But you know what's interesting is that even with the Strawberry Fields, John saying, I said cranberry sauce, to me, it never sounds like that. It sounds like I'm very bored, which is something they also claim that they said.
I'm very bored.
And so there is this, always there's the discrepancy as well. So what happened with this hoax is that essentially, the rumor had gone around in London that there was a possibility that Paul McCartney was dead and that he had died in a car accident, a terrible car accident. Now, at the end of 1965, Paul had a moped accident and he had to get his lip stitched and he had some bruising over his eyebrows and his tooth, I think, chipped.
Right.
And so that was one part of maybe this underground talk. Then there was another rumor that Paul had actually died in a car accident in his Mini Cooper. Mm-hmm. And
It was decapitated, right? That's what they say.
All kind of things and all kind of wild things, that he had picked up a hitchhiker and she had hugged him when she realized who he was. It was a rainy night, and that she tried to hug him, and then they crashed the car and died. And it's like, well, wow, who gave that account? Because since they're both dead, how did that happen?
Right. I mean, how would we know that that's what they were doing, unless some omnipotent person was watching it all?
But what is interesting, Jeffrey, is in Jeffrey. I called you Jeffrey.
Yeah, you call me Jeffrey, like that's my name or something.
Is that in February 1967 of the Beatles Book Monthly, under False Rumor, I'm going to read to you what they wrote in there. And so, here's the evidence that this is something that had been addressed well before September 1969. Stories about the Beatles are always flying around Fleet Street. The 7th January was very icy, with dangerous conditions on the M1 motorway, linking London with the Midlands. And towards the end of the day, a rumor swept London that Paul McCartney had been killed in a car crash on the M1. But of course, there was absolutely no truth in it at all, as the Beatles' press officer found out when he telephoned Paul's St. John's Wood home, and was answered by Paul himself, who had been home all day with his black Mini Cooper safely locked up in the garage. Well, Paul didn't have a black Mini Cooper. He had a custom green one. It was John, George, and Ringo who had black Mini Coopers. But so there is a piece of evidence that the Beatles probably read about as well.
Details. Okay, well,
I'm just curious, because to me, as all these years of looking at these clues and thinking about it and just having the doubt, which, from my opinion, I think there's no way there could be an imposter, because I just don't think that an imposter could come in and essentially take over the group, that John would give up his leadership, or that George would let this new guy come in and just run rampant with them.
Especially because Paul and George were childhood friends. But I could counter that and say, if you watch Let It Be, all right, and the bit of tension between George and Paul, especially when Paul was trying to dictate how he wanted a part to go or not play guitar. He says, I'll play whatever you want me to play, or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. Whatever it will please you, I will do it. And I'm thinking, maybe because that's not really Paul. Maybe because it's William Campbell. Maybe because it's this other guy, this super talented lookalike whiz that, could have been in a Beatles tribute band like 1964 or Rain. They have them now. There are plenty of lookalikes out there. There's plenty of talented people with good voices.
Lookalike is a stretch.
Lookalike is a stretch. But maybe they did recruit somebody. And this guy, that had actually written Eleanor Rigby and written Here, There, and Everywhere and Yesterday and these classic songs, lyrics like Cole Porter, all of a sudden becomes up with Maxwell Silver Hammer, and then later on comes up with classics like Silly Love Songs and Let 'Em In, and it's like this vapid stuff later, some of it. And I'm thinking, but talented, but somewhat vapid. And I'm thinking, could that really be the same guy? It makes you wonder, right?
Well,
I'm playing devil's advocate here, folks.
So you listen to that, and to me, it's like, sometimes you just write your best stuff early, and maybe as you get older, it's like you're stretching to get good material. But I always just looked at Paul, and I thought about how his face changed. And if you go on the internet, and if you look at YouTube,
of course,
there's like this whole wormhole that you can fall into and spend far too much time in. But there are suggestions that you look at Paul's ears and his earlobes, that's the real key, and that fake Paul wore fake ears, which is unbelievably hysterical.
That is just stupid. But how tall was the original Paul, and how tall is the supposed imposter? Do look at the height. You mentioned this to me the other day. We were talking about this as well. One, he looks a little taller, and this one, he's a little.
Well, if you look at, and then you don't know the perspective of the photograph and what kind of shoes they're wearing, but in the early days, it always looked like the Beatles, except for Ringo, were relatively close in height, 5'11".
Right.
And then after, when Paul had Martha, and I think it's like the Magical Mystery Tour,
Martha
Sgt.
is
Pepper.
the dog. Martha's the dog.
Yes, the sheepdog. That there seems to be moments when Paul is actually quite physically taller than John. And I'm like, oh, but maybe John had lifts in his Cuban heel boots. I don't know.
Oh, who knows what he had, John. He loved those. Oh, they all were wearing those Cuban heel boots at the time, and that was part of their get up and their new Beatles, quote, uniform, which later they rebelled against. But who knows? I mean, basically, we would spend our time, what kicked all this off, at least for me, was looking at the Sgt. Pepper cover. And everyone, because the cover was something new and the lyrics for the first time were published on the back, and because the lyrics were somewhat always cryptic, like was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds really about LSD, people were reading all kinds of messages into it. And then you look at the cover, we can go into this cover, but what appeared to be clues to people, or suggestions of clues, is that it looks like you have an entire audience with the original wax figures of the Beatles, and then the Beatles dressed up in the Sgt. Pepper outfits, overlooking beds of flowers, and it appears to be like a grave. And one of the features I read about, whereas the yellow roses is shaped like a guitar or a bass guitar, and it says
it's a left-handed bass,
right? Left-handed bass that reads like a Paul. But I didn't see. First of all, I've never seen the letters for PAUL in that getup, and you'd have to really stretch that and look really close. That was a clue I never saw or never understood. But what it represented to me is that maybe this is the old Beatles are now gone, and this is now we've been reborn. And as we're going to be whoever we want to be, we can play the Sgt. Pepper role. We can, in other words, we're not the same band that we were. And I think that was perhaps what the subconscious or conscious intention was, to create all these figures. But you mentioned Aleister Crowley to me earlier, who is the guy that
he's an occultist.
The occultist that delved into dark magic and
the Golden Dawn,
right?
Thoth Tarot.
Well, he was in the quote audience. They put his figure in there, and they say it appeared twice. Not just once.
They hid him. No, they hid him.
They hid him, right? But he delved into maybe dark magic. So,
well, in Crowley's, I think 1913 book about magic, he says that you need to become adept at reading and speaking in reverse, and that means listening to films in reverse and phonographs in reverse and writing in reverse. And so in the actual book of magic that he wrote, he says, "I am he," which is something that either John must have, wow, what a coincidence, or he lifted.
Or he probably lifted. Well, remember, he read a lot. John took a lot of LSD. He experimented with it, as a bunch of them did, well, after it was slipped in their drinks by a dentist. We've heard that story. But I think that was an influence. But he also had read a lot of Lewis Carroll, which is... Jabberwocky, which is a lot of surrealistic images. That's just what was going on at the time. But so he wrote stuff like I Am the Walrus, and the whole bit about the walrus was Paul later. Here's another clue for you all. Okay, oh my gosh, they're telling us there's a clue.
But it goes to my thinking, as were the Beatles a part of this, of adding the clues in, taking the mick out of us, essentially, and having some fun with it, because the origin of how it spread nationally and internationally is that in September of 1969, a college student wrote an article in the paper, and you can print it off, you can find it on the internet, and just printed off these clues. And then from there, it went to, I think it was Russ Gibb on the radio. Someone called in and said, I want to talk about Paul McCartney being dead. And it's amazing how quickly this story took off. In fact, Jeff, let me go ahead and...
It caught fire. It really did.
Let me read to you. This is from one of the magazines that came out in 1969, and I'm sure if you're a Beatles fan...
It said Paul McCartney, born 1942, died, question mark,
this is the Great Hoax.
Yep.
But you know what? See, this is a reprint from 78. The original is in the attic, is my attic. I have it.
Right.
So let me just read to you that this magazine came out quickly, and in those days, it was like you had the teen, what was it, 16 magazine.
Right, they have the teen magazine, 16.
There was like Rona Barrett's, there were kind of Hollywood books that coming out quickly, movie stuff. And so this, again, it goes to how rumors and conspiracies spread like wildfire so quickly. Thousands of weeping mourners surrounded Paul McCartney's estate in the elegant section of St. John's Wood, London. The British police tried their best to keep the crowds away, but as the hours passed and the news of Paul's death circulated, more and more fans showed up to honor and mourn their fallen hero. American and British radio stations across both countries found their switchboards jammed with unceasing calls. Was it true? Was Paul really dead? Each unknown voice on the other end of the line asked. But the mystified radio and television announcers did not know what to reply. Along with the callers, they remained in the dark, hoping for some helpful comment from the one person who could solve the mystery, Paul McCartney himself. But was the man living in St. John's Wood really Paul McCartney, or a clever imposter? Was attractive Linda Eastman married to Paul or to a stranger? Were all the Beatles taking part in a chilly masquerade that dated back to November 1966, supposedly the date the real Paul McCartney died in a violent automobile accident? If proof were needed that Paul was alive, could the man who claimed to be Paul supply the truth? These were the questions that needed answers, but who was there to answer them? So this... You're reading this and you're a kid, you're like, I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I'm like, oh my God, because it's a whole book of what ifs and clues, and this was the hoax itself made it to national news. I think it was Chet Huntley.
Yeah, Chet Huntley was Chet Huntley's national news.
David,
right?
Someone else, I don't remember.
I don't either.
And so that happened quickly, and this is, again, October 1969. And then by November, I want to say that that was the F. Lee Bailey, who at the time was a noted attorney.
All right.
Had this special, and there are no copies of that special left that we can see.
Except not in pure form, no, but actually on YouTube videos, you see excerpts from it. There's some videos out there that address this. What's the handle on that you
It's
showed?
called, I think, the Winged Beetle.
The Winged Beetle, right? That addresses this and asks those questions because, well, some of the so-called clues are seem almost convincing in a way. And is it possible? I mean, they all changed their looks. Maybe was that just part of a cover-up to changing their appearance? All of them growing their hair longer, growing mustaches, so that it could look like they were all doing it at the same time. I mean, you could really.
And did they all lose their baby fat and from the drugs and being so thin that made them look gaunt?
Maybe so, but I have a feeling that because John at the time was listening and reading the Timothy, not the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but based on the summary of it, not the original one, and based on Timothy Leary's Tune In, Drug In, Drop Out. He was taking a lot of LSD, like in Tomorrow Never Knows. Those basically his ego he was destroying his ego. That was the goal, I think, of the philosophy at the time, is let go of your ego. So he practically was letting go of his ego so much. He formerly being an aggressive leader of the group, that he just let Paul do whatever he wanted. And so I don't think that...
Were the Beatles as callous and as mercenary to go along with something that, if, God forbid, they say if the Paul McCartney died in an accident, we can't afford to do this because it'll crush the British sterling or the British currency, and life can't go on. We're going to have to do something here to maintain... What's happening?
Maintain the illusion, of the Beatles.
So, were they calculating? And in my mind, no, they would never do that.
I don't know. I mean, it was a bigger movement than that. It was larger than them. What if there were some greedy record executives and say, no, this is going to actually impact the economy of the time. It's not only going to impact their futures and the band. The band would have been over. I mean, it was unthinkable back then to replace band members. I mean, nowadays everyone replaces somebody, but that passes away, and the bands are never quite the same, but people still go see them, right?
Well, for example, Led Zeppelin,
they
stopped the band after John Bonham died,
right?
But the Who, it's like filling the seats.
I mean, people still go see them, right? But the point is that these were the Beatles, and that would have been almost unthinkable, at least at that time. So, would someone be that desperate or unethical or greedy to want to propagate such if that were an actual truth, would they go that far to replace them with it? And could William Campbell be formerly of the CIA, or maybe they were
MI6 or whatever,
or it could have been something, MI6 or the Illuminati. I mean, you can.
And William Campbell was supposedly, they had a lookalike contest, and he won for Paul McCartney. And if you read some of the accounts, it's like the winner of the contest was never announced. It kind of just went away. And they're saying that they pulled him in. It was in that, it begs, what's the word?
It begs the question.
Again, tribute bands, they can learn to play left-handed. They can learn to play piano. They can
you had to be left-handed. Right, you had
guitar.
to be
You
look
could
like
learn
him.
to do that, but it's more than that. It was, it's how the Beatles were such a tight unit. Would they ever let that happen?
Would the actual Beatles let that happen? I don't know. I'm not them. I mean, I don't know. What would John do? I think that, of course, we know. I think it's all BS anyway. But
totally,
I mean, it's complete nonsense. All of this. But let's just indulge people for a while. Let's say John looked at everyone and they saw that this was going on, all this talk, and says, "Oh, let's mess with them just a little more." John was not above pulling a sick joke. All right. If you read in his own right, everything, he had nothing but sick jokes. I mean, John was
and
like
he also
that.
said that they used to put in little things like the tit, 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 and
Oh,
girl,
yeah. Of course. And they would throw things into to see if it would get past the
this is
censors.
a very different macabre. What's the word?
This is a different level.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, this is taking it to another level. But here's another clue for you all. The Walrus was Paul. They were very aware that people were starting to read a lot of stuff into their lyrics. And unfortunately, you had crazies out there, like, unfortunately, Charles Manson reading into Helter Skelter. So, you had all kinds of people reading into Beatle lyrics and
The
making
Age
them,
of Aquarius, I think.
Right. And, of course, making them more than what they actually were. But then I think that John, knowing that, would purposefully maybe throw in something for them to keep them interested, and for instance, I think these were all complete, total coincidences where on Abbey Road you see Paul is barefoot, which means supposedly symbolizes that he's the dead
corpse.
one, even the corpse, right? And the way they were dressed on the front cover, John's wearing all white, so he is
like the preacher.
He's the
or
preacher.
Minister.
He's the preacher. Ringo is the
Undertaker.
And then, there's the corpse, and then George follows and is dressed in his jeans, so he must be the gravedigger, right? So, and then there was the car, the Volkswagen that says 28 if, which by the time it'd come out, maybe he would have been 28.
Or they're
if he had
saying that
lived.
the Eastern philosophy is that they consider the 9 months that you were being carried as a year.
Right. They're carrying that in, and since they were into Eastern philosophy influenced, 28 if then might have made some sense. And on the back of the cover, and you flip it over, there's like in the brick wall, there's like
three dots.
The 3 dots, you're looking at
But you
that.
have to connect them and it makes a 3. And then there's a crack through the Beatles
And then,
name.
and then you go through the lyrics, and then there's all these little clues like 1 and 1 and 1 is 3 on come together. All right. Instead of 4. There's all kinds of lyrical references you can pick out, which actually, if you throw it all together, maybe on some subconscious level, John, wanted to leave the band sooner because he was restless and kind of unhappy. He was living with Cynthia. He thought it was a fake life. And, he was basically waiting for Yoko. Even though he had loved Cynthia when he first met her, he was a bit flighty and he was always restless and dissatisfied. So here along comes, and Paul gets a more of a leading role in the band because, admittedly, George would admit this later that, we were a bit lazy. We're glad that, or Ringo would say, we were glad that Paul pushed us because we were getting a little lazy, and Paul would say, let's get to work, boys. So Paul taking more of a leadership role in the band, and John tripping out on LSD all the time and, subsuming his own ego. So all of this stuff combined, I think would have made it literally just impossible for someone, an imposter, to come in and take over the band as a business proposition for the illusion of keeping the band going, that they would then subsequently break up, within 2 years afterwards, Why wouldn't they keep it going if this was really true and a business machine? Why would they not want to keep that machinery going instead of John saying, "I want a divorce," at the end? Because he was very prone to being
Dramatic.
dramatic, of course. John.
I think they're all drama queens.
Well, and I bet, they're both men. They're all men with substantial egos. Let's not kid ourselves. I mean, they all had, they're all tremendously talented, and they're all asserting their individual strong identities. All of them, I think, were strong identities. But of course, John was restless, unhappy, was so searching for the next thing. And for him, the next thing was his relationship with Yoko, because he never had anything quite like that. And so he just wanted to be with her, and he didn't want to be bothered with them anymore. And I think they kind of resented that Paul's, basically his superior musicality and talent over in terms of technical ability, and the fact that he pushed them to work so hard and kept the, quote, illusion of the band. I think the band... They all think that John felt that when Brian Epstein died, that the band was breaking up, that was done at that point. And because it was Brian was the glue that kind of kept them together once they were done with the touring. So you going back to the hoax, the conspiracy?
Well, let's talk about Sgt. Pepper.
Sgt. Pepper.
That was so flush with things to look at. So when you're a kid and you've got your Sgt. Pepper album and you open up the gatefold sleeve and you see the picture of them, and then you look at the partial patch on Paul's blue costume or his whatever you want to call it, uniform.
His uniform, right?
And
Sgt. Pepper
looks
uniform.
like OP. You can't really tell.
Looks like OPD.
Well, almost, not quite. It looks like OP something, and then it turned into officially pronounced dead, is what they said. How they, instead of saying dead on arrival like they do in the U.S., it was OPD, but apparently that's not true.
In England, that's what it would be.
But it's not true, apparently. That's not what they do. And it really is a patch that has OPP. It's Ontario Provincial Police. But what's curious is that, and I forgot to mention this before, but the spiraling of this rumor in the fall of 1969 led to Life magazine basically kind of trespassing on Paul's property in Scotland to find him. And he was very angry at first, and then he calmed down. And he said, "I'm not dead. And listen, I have a new life now with my children. Just, this is how I want to do it." And what he really said in there is there's no more Beatles in there, but that was kind of like glossed over.
Right.
And, oh, hell, I forgot my point.
Well, you'll find it. If you lose it, if you dropped your point somewhere, just go pick it up and find it. But let's look at, again, as Sgt. Pepper, the flower beds. There were so many so-called clues in there.
I know what my point was. My point was that they asked him about the patch on his Sgt. Pepper costume.
Oh, they asked him about it.
And he said, OPD is probably Ontario Police Department. I'm thinking, really? I mean, you were saying that maybe he's just not a details guy?
Canadian. Maybe he's not. No, maybe he's not a details guy. Well, it stands for
Ontario
Provincial Police, OPP, not OPD. Well, what does it matter? I mean, like everyone was reading into extremes with some of these clues. For instance, Paul, there's a picture in the White Album of Paul in the bathtub with his head. Oh, that must mean his head is decapitated. Oh, come on, you idiots.
But there is a picture on the White Album poster where they're like these two skeleton hands that are like reaching out for him.
It looks like skeleton hands?
Yes.
I never really detected that.
Oh, I'll show you after this.
Yeah.
But so Sgt. Pepper, the coincidental clues of, on the back cover, Paul not facing the camera and George pointing to the line at Wednesday morning at what?
Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock, the day begins from she's leaving home,
yes,
which is supposedly the time that on November 9th he went out. He was angry after a session.
Oh, the other thing, and so that's on the back,
right.
And then you get to see the lyrics. In a day in the life, he blew his mind out in a car.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one there.
That was huge.
The whole thing was basically the story of a day in the life. And John was actually referring to, maybe he was in the House of Lords. Yeah, someone else that had an actual accident. He wasn't talking about Paul, but everyone interpreted that maybe that was Paul. Like the section where he goes, woke up, fell out of bed. And he was doing that part. Maybe that was the morning that he maybe went out and got himself killed, supposedly. And then the rest of it was about, the story of his death and telling the story through that. And then, of course, the crescendo of the orchestra leads up to the big moment, and the final chord, meaning it's over, it's his death. That's just like, it's like a funeral, almost like a funeral dirge. It can be interpreted. It was interpreted that way, and amongst other songs, that came afterwards. But no, and that's the only obvious one.
No, but there were several other clues, like the doll with the white car in her lap, and then the bloody gloves next to the doll.
Yeah, what was that? I mean,
the bloody glove, the white car, symbolic of the car that he died in. In fact, if you look at that Winged Beetle video, they show the white car going in the back of the Strawberry Fields music video, and they show the white car at all different times, how this white car is in the
Free
background.
as a Bird. Well, in Free as a Bird, you'll notice that the video that was made of that, a Lennon song
for the Beatles anthology.
Revamped for the Beatles anthology, where you see the car wreck, and that was kind of addressed indirectly. It was that rumor. And I think they just...
Go back to the Sgt. Pepper, and with the hand over Paul's head. We see that not only in Sgt. Pepper, we see it multiple times in Magical Mystery Tour. We see it in Yellow Submarine. And boy, what a coincidence that every time it's just Paul's head that has a hand over it.
Well, maybe he's blessed. Paul is blessed. And put your hand over in blessing. No, well, the hand over the head. When I was younger, looking at this stuff, I never saw that.
Well, it was right there, though.
Well, I didn't know. I mean, it wasn't among the clues that I read about. The ones I read about were more about listening to the lyrics and going back and saying, when you play this backwards, again, I had wrecked a couple of records, original records, unfortunately, and worn out the grooves on them and the needles on the turntables, folks, going, just doing all that stuff and listening for what they said backwards. That was the initial thing.
Well, and also looking at the albums and really digging deep.
Right.
Because if you look through the next set of most popular clues is Magical Mystery Tour, and they're dressed as wizards, maybe in honor of Aleister Crowley.
Right.
And they are, they have the whole walrus thing.
The fictional in the sky. The Beatles were in the sky and there were wizards. And then there was the patch when he was wearing his military outfit.
And then he's sitting at the desk and it says, I was. It really says, you was. But in the larger letters, it says, I was. And
right.
There are more pictures there of them with everybody, and it's like the whole crew of people, and again, someone's got his hand over Paul's head, so it's interesting. And remember what Nicola said in it, the young child actress. I think it was something that the walrus...
I'm the walrus, and Nicole says underneath, no, you're not. No,
yeah.
You're not. Oh, that's silly. That's just silliness. Well, you can look into songs like, Your Mother Should Know. And when he's and there's the other one from Magical Mystery Tour where in the video where during that song, they're all going down dressed in white suits.
White tuxedos.
White tuxedos, actually, right. Going dancing and doing a spiral staircase, gleaming staircase. And Paul's the only one wearing a black rose.
And his explanation was that they ran out. However, in his hand are red roses.
He's holding red roses in his hand.
With some other flowers, but he has red roses in his hand.
I don't know.
So,
I mean, yeah, again, that's just, that's just a bunch of nonsense, really. But I think that he was dressed like that. So again, that was used as a clue. And then in Blue Jay Way, it was my friends have lost their way. It was very creepy. I mean, I am the walrus. All the lyrics of that song. I am he as you are me, and we are all together. Well, that's only 3. Again, 3 out of 4. People made all kinds of things.
Again, on the Sgt. Pepper front cover, if you look at it a certain way, it says something, I 1-1 die or something. It was sort of 119.
Right, on the Sgt. Pepper cover, we're talking about that big drum. And they're saying on the big drum, and it has the insignia of the band name. If you hold up a mirror to that, then it says something about something with die, D-I-E, and then it looks like some type of Roman numerals that indicate the date of death as November 9th. And basically, Karen just got her mail delivered in the front door.
You've got mail.
And it happens. Stuff happens. So I think that mail drop is kind of significant. I think that somebody out there is actually listening to us as we record this.
The fallacy with the problem with the 11/9, if you look at that, it's the British have a different, we do our month and then date, and they do the date and then the month, I believe, like 9 September.
Right. In Europe, they do the date first. Right. They do the day of the month first, and then the month, and then the year. Right.
Does it go to society that we can manipulate and make anything kind of fit a scenario?
I think that we tend to create our own storyline and ideas from that. The mind has a tendency to want to look for pieces to fit together and create a narrative and create a story to make sense of things. And this, for the more conspiratorial minded or people with great imaginations, can look at so-called clues and put them together and say, yes, it's plausible that maybe someone, a famous person had died and needed to be replaced because the Beatles were that important.
It could happen.
It could. Is it likely? No, not really. But it is interesting to see, all the other things that you can look for when you always find what you're looking for. So when you look for additional clues, you can make something look like anything. I mean, and of course the Beatles were already leaving impressions all over the place. That's what great songwriting does. So I have a feeling.
The interesting thing is that even to this day, Paul is still asked about it. Like, I think it was
there's a video we watched.
David Letterman.
Right, you sent me a video and they asked the question.
David Letterman, and he's like going, no,
look at you smiling. There's no
it's like
smiling
people
at each
begin
other.
to look at you like, and there's like he's cocking his head, and they're looking at you. Are you the real Paul or not the real Paul? And then remember Chris Farley on the Saturday Night Live thing. Sorry, I keep hitting the table. And he says, and the Paul is dead. Was that true? So here it's a lifetime of doubt of here's this incredible hoax, this unbelievable thing that picked up traction around the world where people are buying, and apparently Capitol Records said, no, we're really not a part of this. It's not a marketing scheme. But in '69, they were selling a ton of albums, and people were going bananas for this. And as you can see, the Paul McCartney magazines and the special on TV. I mean,
it's just like
they had to love it,
right? I mean, when you look on the back, like you look on the inner sleeve, because it was the first album that had an inner sleeve.
What, Sgt. Pepper?
Sgt. Pepper, and there's Paul sitting there with his legs folded, as if, and they say, "Oh, that's Paul in fetal position. It must mean he's dead." All kinds of stuff like that. When you see them on front cover of Magical Mystery Tour, they're all in costume. All right.
Is there a hand over his head?
Yeah, the hand. There's again hand over the head, and you're looking at.
How about if Paul took his shoes off in the Magical Mystery Tour when they're playing and next to Ringo's drum, which kind of had orange, and so they're like, oh, they're bloody. It's bloody shoes. No, he took his shoes off. Maybe he has sweaty feet and he has to take his shoes off often.
Maybe Paul just likes to walk around with barefoot, or with sandals on. If this is the kind of guy that wears sandals, there's some guys like that don't like to wear socks and sneakers and shoes, and so he wants to dress like that. Fine, it's not the first time. It gets silly, but
there is if you go to the White Album and if you look at the poster that's included, there are a couple things in there that draw your attention, and one of them, they say, is the picture of William Campbell, the imposter who was brought into the band, and he has glasses, and one thing, if you look at Paul, his face really did change quite a bit throughout 7 or 8 years, as everybody's face changes. You're not the same as when you're 22 or 23.
I am. I've never changed.
You lose
hardly changed at all.
Fullness in your face,
No.
and it doesn't help that Paul was, I would say, a baby face, because there's nowhere to go but not, in the wrong direction for that. But his face became so elongated. It used to be this little chubby face, and it became very elongated. It became very different. And if you look at, it's hard to find, but if you can Google Paul and Mal Evans in Kenya in the fall of 1966. He went to Kenya, I believe, also with Jane Asher. They also went to France, and he looks emaciated. He looks so unbelievably thin. I'm like, oh my.
He did look thin there.
Good
You showed me, you sent me the pictures. Some of them are a little bit, not the greatest quality photos, but yeah, I saw the pictures. And maybe he did.
And then after that, I sent you that picture of Paul at a party, I think at the Indica Gallery with Julie Felix, who was a folk singer. And I'll put it in our YouTube video, that picture. And he looks like, it doesn't even look, he looks like totally someone different.
Well, John always changed his appearance.
John dramatically changed his appearance.
John changed his appearance almost every other day. I mean, you didn't know how long his hair was going to be, if he wore the glasses or not, and even then, if the sideburns were going to be long, if he'd be bearded. You know, at one point, each of them looked like Christ, growing their beards so long, and like George would do that. I mean, they'd all changed their appearance after 1966. When they gave up the, quote, mop top appearance and then just let everything go, they changed their appearance all the time, and I think that Paul was no exception. He liked to dress and change the way he looked, and I think they was said that he grew the mustache to cover up the
scar on his lip,
little scar on his upper lip from his moped accident, which is a real thing, folks. That actually did happen. That's documented, but there is really, but the bottom line is, where is your evidence, people? All right. All of this stuff is a lot of fun. We're picking out our so-called clues. We're stringing things together. Even the Beatles, maybe like you suggested, were maybe aware of what was going on in the audience or the ether and decided to play with us just a little bit. Remember, they stopped touring, so they weren't be able to promote the records in the same way. So was this kind of a subtle, cynical play at promotion? Did we play this up so that the album sales would increase and everyone would be buying the records and looking at the clues? Was this just a huge deception, a marketing ploy? Or were they really that cynical? I don't think so. But the way that it happened, it did help generate sales because people were buying the Abbey Road, more copies of Abbey Road to look at the clues.
The byproduct was that the other people were writing songs like St. Paul. Did you hear about that? And the guy's writing this song about...
Yeah, ding, 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 ding. Sorry, we can't answer that.
That was St. Paul at the door.
Yeah, it was St. Paul at the door. We're in the middle of our podcast, people. Sorry,
okay.
We cannot answer the door.
That's fine. They're dropping off a package, I'm sure. So St. Paul, and then there are other songs that people are, of course, they're like doing these novelty songs quickly to take advantage of the controversy.
Right.
And it's funny to go back and to listen to them, although I think that St. Paul was written quite early. I don't have any notes on it in front of me. I just happened to listen to it the other night. And here was that. Did you see that weird thing in that Winged Beetle video? Which
I did.
Was
the three. I saw three of them.
No, it was one of those songs was published on Maclaren Music, which was John and Paul's publishing, but I don't think that that's right.
No,
I think
don't
that's
think
a mistake.
No, I think that's an error.
Again, there's so much misinformation.
Oh yeah, it's basically misinformation. Just is so easy to take off on a rumor. I think that people secretly love rumors, and they like little conspiracies because it keeps the mind busy and makes you piece together. Because since you don't really know these people in person, you don't know your musical idols, you want to at least fantasize and imagine that on some level they do, or their absence from the stage means some big conspiracy. So some people are more conspiratorially minded, and so they went and go and have fun with pulling all these so-called clues together, and then the artist may become aware of it. And I can imagine that John would like tease the audience with a couple of things and tidbits.
Well, and what did he say in How Do You Sleep? Those freaks was right when you...
Those freaks were, well, because he was aware of it. And he said those freaks was right when they said you was dead. The one mistake you made was in your head. Why would he say that to an imposter? He would say that because that was confirmation that Paul was actually alive, because...
That's right. And when you're angry with someone and you have this public feud...
Right.
There's evidence there's a lot of care and emotion that was in part of that. And so an imposter, to have that level of
Right. I would not receive that level of
anger.
emotion. He wouldn't
Correct.
wouldn't have cared, right? But the venom was directed at a real person, his actual friend, Paul, like two brothers having an argument. Same thing. So again, people, I had a lot of fun, ruining my records when I was young and looking at the album covers and actually wondering, is this possible? Well, I'll tell you what, if it is all true, and they did come up with this and this look-alike, sound-alike, and also artistically brilliant William Campbell is now Paul McCartney, I'd say, William, you've done a great job. I've loved your records. Thank you very much. You make a
and
great
everybody had to
Paul.
go along with it. George Martin, Jane Asher,
Yes,
the
they
Beatles.
all
I mean,
went
they
along with
all
it.
were part of the cover
Oh,
up.
yeah. Oh, yes, we all went along with it. And yes, it all really happened.
It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
It is ridiculous, but it is very, very interesting. And
Well, we
listen,
need it to be addressed. I think that we'll need to kind of discuss this. And now that from the perspective of time and aging, and we look at this, and now Paul is now...
79.
Paul is 79 years old. Thank God. I'm glad he's still around. Ringo's 81. You'd think he would have said something by now, right? So, no, nothing happened. But it was all lots of fun and games. And, of course, we love looking at Beatle lyrics to see what they mean. And sometimes John loved playing with words. John Lennon loved language and words. And he had a lot of fun, putting, quoting lyrics that actually, you could read your own meaning into. Just like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, was that about LSD? No, it was indeed about his son Julian with a drawing he made of a girl in the class named Lucy. So that was all verifiable.
Was it?
Yeah, it was.
Or was it
No, it wasn't.
twofold?
No, I don't think so.
We'll never know.
Well, I don't know.
We'll never know, will we?
I'm not there. I'm just based
That's
upon the
right.
information
We're
I know.
only speculating. So with this podcast, we didn't want to go over every single clue. We didn't want to do we just wanted to talk about it from the perspective of growing up with this and the fascination that we still have and the curious things that we still seem to see on the internet and what people spend a lot of time making some sophisticated videos and doing some sophisticated studies and studying the vocal patterns of Paul McCartney at age 23 and 33. And it's like, you know what? Your voice changes over time.
Every 7 years, just like your cells change in your body. And of course you change. So everyone ages, everyone changes. And the voice will change over years. It cannot be helped. It's just something that happens. And I'm still thankful, though, that the person that says he's Paul McCartney, I believe him. He's Paul McCartney. At least he's the only Paul that I know. And I'm quite happy.
We like this Paul.
And I like this Paul. He seems like a pretty decent guy, at least now, and great artist. And we really appreciate, we love the Beatles and everything. And we love the fact that so this came up, and so this was a very partially profitable hoax that happened at the time, but I don't think the Beatles themselves had anything to do with it. I think they were just amused and maybe
Having some
slightly
fun with
annoyed.
it.
Having fun with it, maybe slightly annoyed, of course, but also amused with it and said, okay, well, let them think what they're going to think, we still bought the records and we still listen to them,
So I think that's why we're going to wrap it up and just kind of just wanted to put it out there. So we thank you so much for listening today. And this podcast is available on all the typical podcast platforms, Anchor, Apple, Amazon, etc. Spotify. What else, Jeff? I don't remember. But we also have a YouTube channel,
Right.
and I'll put up some pictures that we talked about today of the magazines and not all the clues, it's overwhelming, but a couple things. And if you are so inclined, go to the YouTube and subscribe and leave a comment about your experience and how you kind of see through the Paul McCartney is dead hoax.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening. Appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
All right, see you folks. Thanks very much.